On the evening she thought would mark a new chapter in her marriage, the people she trusted most set a trap so cruel it could have destroyed her forever. Miriam sat at a candlelit table in Golden Palm restaurant, her heart light with hope. It was their wedding anniversary dinner, a night she believed would be filled with love, laughter, and the promise of renewal. But when Tabo, her husband, raised his glass and loudly toasted to being free, single and searching, the words struck her like a spear. The clink of his champagne flute echoed in the stunned hush of the dining hall. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he handed her a small gift box. Inside, folded neatly, was a silky white scarf with bold black letters embroidered across it. 3 years of disappointment. Laughter flickered in his eyes, while his mother, Patricia, raised her own glass in triumph and his father, Sifo, smirked as if savoring a long-awaited victory. Miriam's fingers trembled on the fabric as the weight of the humiliation sank in. Where are you watching from today? Kindly hit like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more. The whole scene felt unreal, as if she were watching herself from a distance. Patrons at nearby tables turned their heads, pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word and gesture. Patricia leaned forward slightly, her smile sharpened like a blade, while Sifo's low chuckle carried the smugness of a man who thought the game was already won. Tabo leaned closer and whispered with a false sweetness that barely masked his malice. "Hold it up higher, my love, let everyone see." Miriam's mind flashed back to the cracks in their marriage she had ignored for over a year. The late nights at the office that never seemed to end. The unfamiliar cologne that lingered on his clothes. The way his hand, once warm and firm in hers, had grown cold and mechanical. Their conversations had shrunk to nothing but reminders about bills and schedules. On Sundays, the days they once spent making pancakes together, Tabo would vanish for golf with his father or networking brunches at places Miriam was never invited. Slowly, her home had turned into a cold echo chamber where she spoke out loud just to remember the sound of her own voice. 7 weeks earlier, Miriam had tried to rekindle the warmth between them. She suggested they plan something meaningful for their anniversary. To her surprise, Tabo's face had lit up. "Leave it to me," he'd said with a smile that looked genuine enough to make her believe. "It will be memorable." She had no idea that his definition of memorable involved orchestrating her public shaming. The first warning came in the form of a crumpled receipt she found while doing laundry, from a shop downtown that specialized in custom embroidery. The date matched a night he'd claimed to be stuck at the office. The order description read, "White silk scarf, black stitch, 3 years of disappointment." At first, she told herself it must be a joke for a friend. But deep inside, a cold dread began to take root. She remembered that same evening, how Tabo had returned home after midnight, showered before bed, and claimed the office had been too stuffy. Now, holding the receipt, she saw the truth. This was no misunderstanding. This was a plan. A plan his parents likely knew about. Perhaps even helped design. Sitting on the laundry room floor, surrounded by baskets of clothes, Miriam felt the foundation of her world tilt. The man she had loved for 3 years was preparing not just to wound her, but to do it in front of an audience. The next morning, Miriam carried the scarf in her handbag as if it were evidence in a trial. Every time her fingers brushed the smooth fabric, her chest tightened. She thought of confronting Tabo immediately, but she knew a man like him, and a family like his, would twist the truth until she looked like the villain. She needed proof. That week, she began watching his movements more closely. When he claimed to be working late, she noted the times he left home, the calls he took in hushed tones, and the way he would check his phone in the middle of their conversations. Each small detail added weight to the unease building inside her. Her first real break came at a small cafe 2 streets from her office. Miriam had started stopping there after work, just to be somewhere warm where she could gather her thoughts. One Tuesday evening, as she sat stirring her tea, a young waitress named Lorato approached with a hesitant smile. "Excuse me, your last name is Makona, right?" Miriam nodded, startled. "I work weekends at the Olive Branch," Lorato continued softly. "Your in-laws come there often. I've overheard them talking about you. And it wasn't kind. Miriam felt the air leave her lungs as Lorato explained how she had seen Tabo, Patricia, and Sifo dining with another woman on several Sundays, the same days Tabo claimed to be golfing. The woman's name was Nandi, and Lorato described her as elegant, mid-30s, always in designer clothes. She wasn't a stranger. Miriam knew her as Patricia's personal assistant. According to Lorato, the family spoke openly about an anniversary surprise they were planning for Miriam, with laughter that carried more venom than joy. They had even joked about reserving a table where everyone could watch the show. "I shouldn't get involved," Lorato admitted. "But it sounded cruel. I would want someone to tell me." Miriam thanked her voice shaking, and left the cafe with her heart pounding so hard it hurt. That night she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house seemed louder, every shadow heavier. She went to Tabo's home office, a place he guarded more fiercely than any locked door. Rummaging through the drawers, she found a small black phone she didn't recognize. It was a burner, the kind people bought when they didn't want to be traced. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the messages. There were hundreds, all between Tabo and a contact saved simply as N. They spoke of romantic getaways, expensive gifts, and a future together. But the words that burned her eyes were the ones where they discussed her as if she were an obstacle to be removed. They mocked her cooking, her appearance, even her loyalty. Tabo had written, "Once this anniversary is done, she'll have nothing left." Miriam sat frozen, the phone heavy in her hand. The betrayal was no longer suspicion. It was fact, written in cruel sentences by the man who once promised to protect her. She slipped the phone into her bag, then quietly took photos of every damning message, knowing she would need them later. By the time she placed it back in the drawer, her tears had dried. Something inside her had shifted. She was no longer the wife waiting for love to return. She was a woman preparing for war. The next morning, Miriam dressed in her sharpest work suit and walked into the offices of Zanil Kumalo, a lawyer known for handling high-conflict divorces with quiet precision. Zanil listened without interrupting as Miriam laid out the details. The scarf, the cafe conversation, the burner phone. "You have more than suspicion," Zanil said finally, sliding a folder across the desk. "But before you act, you need to protect yourself financially. Men like Tabo, they don't just wound the heart. They go after your stability too." Miriam nodded, feeling the steel in the lawyer's words settle inside her. Zanil explained her rights clearly. Miriam was entitled to her fair share of everything they owned together, but she had to act before Tabo drained their accounts. "Start documenting every transaction," Zanil advised. "And quietly move your share into an account he can't touch." The meeting ended with a handshake and a promise. "Don't be reactive, Miriam. Be strategic. Let him think you're still playing the role he expects." As Miriam left, she felt lighter. For the first time since finding the scarf, she had a plan. That same week, she reviewed their joint accounts. The checking account seemed normal, but when she dug into their investment portfolio, her breath caught. Over the past 4 months, Tabo had been transferring small amounts, $2,000 here, $1,500 there, always just below the notification threshold. The total was almost $40,000. Quietly moved to an account in his name alone. Miriam called their financial advisor, pretending it was a casual inquiry. "Oh, Tabo said it's for a surprise," the advisor replied cheerfully. "Didn't want to spoil it for you." Miriam smiled into the phone, masking the storm building inside her. That evening, she opened her own account at a different bank and transferred her personal savings, money she had inherited from her grandmother years before. It was only a fraction of what Tabo had taken, but it was hers alone. She also began quietly gathering documents from their home office. Bank statements, property deeds, insurance policies. Each file went into a locked bag she stored in the boot of her car. She moved like a shadow through her own home, careful not to arouse suspicion. One Saturday afternoon, while searching for more financial papers, Miriam climbed into the attic. There, beneath a layer of dust, she found a metal filing cabinet. Inside were old tax records, property files, and a small box labeled family. At the bottom was a photo album she had never seen. The pictures showed Tabo as a teenager, always beside another young man who looked like him, taller, slightly older, with kinder eyes. On the back of one photo in faded ink were the words, Tabo and Cabello, Summer 1999. Miriam froze. Tabo had never once mentioned having a brother. Digging deeper, she found newspaper clippings, one celebrating Cabello's full scholarship to a prestigious university, another announcing his new job at a financial firm in Cape Town. Then nothing, no more records, no more mentions. It was as if Cabello had been erased from the family's history. The discovery gnawed at her. Who was this man? And why had he vanished from their lives? The next day, Miriam visited their elderly neighbor, Mama Thembai, under the pretense of collecting a recipe. Between sips of rooibos tea, Miriam asked casually, "Did you ever meet Tabo's brother?" Mama Thembai's eyes lit with memory. "Ah, Cabello. That boy had a good heart. Too good for that family. He left after a big fight with Sifo over money, I think. Said he found something wrong in the business and wouldn't keep quiet. After that, his name was never spoken in this house again." Mama Thembai leaned in, her voice lowering. Tabo always wanted Sifo's approval. Cabello didn't care for such games. When Cabello left, they poured all their control into Tabo, told him what to study, where to work, even who to marry. "You, my child, were chosen for him. Not by him." Miriam sat back stunned. She remembered how Patricia had insisted on changing her wedding colors from cream to burgundy. How Sifo had helped them find their house. All those decisions she thought were joint choices had been theirs, not hers. That night, unable to shake the thought, Miriam searched Cabello's name online. It didn't take long to find him, a financial consultant now living in Durban. His profile picture showed the same kind eyes from the old photographs. She hesitated for hours before sending a message. "My name is Miriam Makona. I'm married to Tabo. There are things about your family I believe we should discuss." The reply came the next morning. Harbor Cafe, Thursday noon. The drive to Durban gave her too much time to think. What if Cabello was as manipulative as his parents? What if meeting him only brought more trouble? But when she walked into the cafe and saw him sitting in the corner, watching the door with quiet caution, she felt something shift. He stood to greet her, extending a hand instead of leaning in for a hug. "You look nothing like the wedding photo they keep," he said with a faint smile. "They still display it, you know, usually while saying, 'She was the best Tabo could manage.'" The words stung, but Miriam had learned to wear her pain like armor. She sat down opposite Cabello, studying him closely. He looked like Tabo, but without the hardness in the eyes, a gentler face weathered by experience. "I need to know the truth about your family," she said plainly. "And I need to know before they destroy me completely." Cabello leaned back, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "If they've set their sights on you, it means they're done pretending you belong. Once they reach that stage, they go for humiliation." Miriam's heart tightened. She told him about the scarf, the cafe conversation, the burner phone, and the missing money. Cabello listened without interruption, but she saw his jaw clench with each revelation. "Sounds like Patricia's handiwork," he said at last. "She likes public shows. It's her way of proving she's in control." He then told her his own story, how he had discovered unethical dealings in Sifo's company and refused to stay silent. The result was swift and brutal: accounts frozen, his name erased from the business, and his family cutting all ties overnight. "I was the heir," Cabello said, his voice steady. "Tabo was the backup. When I left, they gave him everything, but at a cost. He's chained to their approval. They control him, Miriam. Even who he marries." Miriam felt her stomach turn. The pieces of her marriage fell into a new and terrible pattern. She wasn't a partner. She had been a placement, selected to fit into their image, easy to manage. Until she stopped being easy. They moved their conversation to a quiet bench outside, shaded by an old jacaranda tree. I have something you should see, Cabello said, pulling a folder from his leather bag. Inside were original partnership documents from Sipho's company. They showed Cabello still owned 25% of the business, a fact that had been buried after his exile. One day, you and Tabo would have inherited another 25% together, he explained. But he either doesn't know or doesn't care. Miriam stared at the papers, feeling the weight of their significance. Cabello admitted he had never pursued his rights before. For me, it was about walking away clean, he said, then his voice softened. But now, it's about more than money. It's about truth. And maybe about protecting someone else from what I went through. Miriam didn't say it aloud, but she felt the unspoken bond between them, two people shaped by the same ruthless family. Over the next few weeks, they met discreetly. Miriam told Tabo she had joined a women's business club to explain her absences, and he accepted the excuse without question. Cabello helped her review her finances and secure her remaining assets. They also began mapping out Patricia's anniversary plan, noting every move she might make. The more time they spent together, the more Miriam noticed the kindness in Cabello's gestures, the way he listened without rushing her, the way he steadied her hand when her resolve faltered. One stormy evening, while they pored over financial documents at his apartment, the rain pounded against the windows. When it came time for her to leave, Cabello simply said, "It's not safe to drive in this weather. Stay." He stayed. What happened between them that night wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. For the first time in years, Miriam felt truly seen. 6 weeks later, Miriam sat on her bathroom floor, staring at a small white stick with a faint pink line. The air in the room seemed to still. She and Tabo hadn't been intimate in months. There was no question who the father was. She called Cabello, her voice trembling as she shared the news. He didn't tell her what to do, he asked. That simple act, giving her the choice, sealed something deep in her heart. This child, she thought, would be proof that life could grow from the ruins of betrayal. Not just a baby but a new beginning. And suddenly, her focus sharpened. The anniversary dinner would no longer be a trap for her. It would be a stage. She would turn their performance into their undoing. The next morning, she met Cabello in a quiet garden cafe. "We act now," she told him. "The dinner is in 3 weeks. We need everything ready before then." They split their tasks. Cabello would prepare the legal documents asserting his stake in the company, and Miriam would secure her finances and gather all the proof of Tabo's betrayal. They would time their reveals like a carefully written script. And when the curtain rose at Golden Palm Restaurant, it wouldn't be Miriam who was left exposed. Miriam's first stop was the office of an independent financial advisor named Larato Molef, recommended by Zanil. Larato went through Miriam's accounts with a sharp eye, marking the transactions where Tabo had siphoned money. "You can legally move half of the remaining joint funds into your own account," she explained. "If he asks, say you're diversifying investments." Miriam followed the advice that same day, transferring her share into a secure account Tabo could not access. For the first time in months, she felt a layer of safety settle over her. Next, she turned her attention to the house. Tabo often bragged that his parents had helped with the down payment, but the title listed both their names. When Tabo announced an overnight business trip to Bloemfontein, Miriam knew it was her chance. She called a discreet real estate agent named Cabello Motuang, no relation to her ally, who specialized in quick, quiet sales during divorce proceedings. He toured the property that afternoon, noting the prime location and recent renovations. "If you decide to sell," he said, "I can have it listed within 24 hours. That evening, Miriam shared the valuation with her Cabello over dinner. He nodded thoughtfully. "If the house sells before they expect it, you'll control the narrative, not them." She agreed. It wasn't just about money. It was about taking back control piece by piece. Every move she made now was another thread pulled from the net Patricia had woven around her life. Meanwhile, Cabello's lawyer had completed the legal package asserting his 25% stake in Sipho's company. The documents were airtight, Original contracts, bank records, board meeting notes. We'll serve them after the dinner, Cabello said. But first, I want to watch their faces when they realize what's coming. The thought gave Miriam a quiet thrill. She had spent years cowering under Patricia's gaze. Soon that gaze would falter. The most critical part of the plan came from an unexpected ally, Lorato the waitress. Miriam met her at a park far from the restaurant to keep things discreet. After hearing the full plan, Lorato agreed to be their eyes and ears inside Golden Palm on the night of the dinner. I'll make sure he doesn't see Cabello until you want him to, Lorato promised. And I'll time the courses so you have the audience you need. Over the next week, Miriam rehearsed her speech in front of Lorato. When you pause after revealing the pregnancy, hold it, Lorato coached. Let Patricia's face tell the story before you even speak the next line. They practiced every beat, from the moment Tabo raised his glass to the second she and Cabello walked out together. By the third rehearsal, Miriam's voice no longer trembled. 2 days before the dinner, Cabello handed Miriam a small velvet box. Inside was a silver pendant in the shape of a phoenix. For the night you rise, he said simply. Miriam fastened it around her neck, feeling its weight like a promise. Whatever happened inside that restaurant, she would not leave as the woman who entered. The night before the dinner, Miriam stood in her bedroom, looking at the deep emerald dress she had chosen. Patricia had always pushed her into burgundy, the Makona family color, but this time she wore what pleased her. She packed a small overnight bag and placed it in her car, knowing she would not return to this house after tomorrow. Cabello called just before she went to bed. Are you ready? He asked. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied. Tomorrow we end their game. They spoke quietly for a while about the child they were bringing into the world. A child who would never know the chains of Sifo and Patricia's control. Whatever happens, Cabello said, we walk out together. The morning of the dinner was warm and bright, as if the weather itself refused to match the storm about to break. Tabo was uncharacteristically pleasant, bringing Miriam breakfast in bed. She accepted it with a smile, her performance flawless. When he left for his golf game with Sifo, she took a deep breath and reviewed the plan one last time. By tonight, the scarf, the toast, and the humiliation they had planned for her would be nothing compared to the blows she was about to deliver. By 6:30 that evening, Miriam stood before her mirror, fastening the silver phoenix pendant around her neck. The emerald dress hugged her frame perfectly, the fabric catching the soft lamplight. She applied her makeup with a steady hand, her eyes sharp but calm. Downstairs, Tabo waited in a charcoal suit she had once called her favorite. You look nice, he said, the words hesitant, almost surprised. It's a special night, she replied smoothly, picking up her purse, which held the documents, her phone, and the small velvet box Cabello had given her. The drive to Golden Palm restaurant passed in strained silence, broken only by Tabo's comments about traffic and the weather. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as they neared the entrance, the only visible sign of the anticipation bubbling under his polished exterior. Inside, Lorato caught Miriam's eye as she led them to the corner table Patricia had reserved for maximum visibility. Patricia wore a crimson gown that seemed to drink in the light, her smile wide but cold. Sifo's handshake was firm and perfunctory, as if they were business associates rather than family. As they settled, Patricia's voice filled the table, recounting tales from her recent country club luncheons. Sifo occasionally interjected with comments about the stock market, while Tabo kept glancing at his watch. Miriam played her role perfectly, smiling politely, responding just enough to keep suspicion at bay. Lorato moved between tables, her presence calm, her eyes flicking subtly to Miriam, signaling that everything was set. The first course came and went in a haze of small talk. Miriam's pulse remained steady, her mind rehearsing each step of the plan. She thought of the scarf folded neatly in her bedroom drawer and how, by the end of the night, Patricia would wish she had never ordered it. Across the table, Tabo adjusted his cufflinks and tapped his knife against his champagne glass. The sharp, metallic ring silenced the room. All eyes turned to him. "I'd like to make a toast," Tabo announced, standing tall. His voice smooth and loud enough to carry across the restaurant. "To 3 years of marriage." He looked down at Miriam with a smirk that made her skin prickle. "And to being free, single and searching." Patricia's eyes gleamed. Sipho's lips curled into a knowing smile. Tabo reached beneath his chair and produced a gift box, placing it before her. "A little something special," he said, his tone dripping with mock affection. Miriam opened the box slowly, revealing the silky white scarf with its black embroidered words. 3 years of disappointment. A few gasps rippled through nearby tables. Patricia chuckled under her breath, glancing around to ensure people were watching. Miriam's fingers traced the stitching, her face unreadable. Then she looked up, smiling. Not the smile of a humiliated woman, but one of absolute control. "Thank you, Tabo," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed room. "Your gift is perfectly timed. I have an announcement of my own." The shift in the air was immediate. Patricia's brow furrowed. Sipho leaned forward, sensing something amiss. Miriam lifted her glass in a mock toast. "For 3 years I tried to be part of this family, never understanding why I always fell short. Tonight has made everything clear." Tabo's smirk faltered. "Sit down, Miriam. You're embarrassing yourself." She didn't flinch. "No, Tabo. Tonight I'm telling the truth." She reached into her purse, pulling out a folder. "First, you've been moving money from our joint accounts for months, preparing for this moment while pretending to be the devoted husband. I've already secured my share, including the proceeds from the sale of our house." Gasps rose from the tables around them. Tabo's face reddened. "You can't sell without my signature. You signed it 3 weeks ago," she cut in smoothly. Before Tabo could respond, Miriam turned toward the entrance and nodded. Cabello stepped into view, walking with deliberate confidence. The resemblance between the brothers was undeniable, and the murmur in the restaurant grew louder. Patricia's color drained. Sipho's jaw tightened. Cabello stopped beside Miriam, resting a steady hand on her back. "Hello, mother. Father. Little brother," he said evenly. "It's been a while." The table fell silent, the air thick with disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" Sipho demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Miriam answered before Cabello could. "It means your performance tonight has been cut short. We've been comparing notes." Cabello placed a folder on the table. "These are the original partnership documents for your company, Sipho. I still own 25%, no matter what lies you've told." Patricia's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. Miriam glanced at her calmly. "And that's not even my biggest announcement." Patricia's voice wavered. "Then what is it, Miriam?" "Another petty accusation." Miriam's gaze softened, but her words cut like glass. "It's not an accusation. It's a child." A ripple of whispers swept through the restaurant. Tabo laughed harshly. "Oh, please. We haven't." He stopped himself, realizing too late the trap in his own words. "Exactly," Miriam said, her tone cool. "Which is why this child's father is standing right here." She reached for Cabello's hand, their fingers intertwining without hesitation. The color drained from Tabo's face as Patricia's jaw dropped. Sipho slammed his palm on the table, rattling the cutlery. "You disgrace this family." "No," Miriam interrupted, her voice rising over his. "I free myself from it." She glanced toward the crowd that had gathered around, their faces a mix of shock and fascination. "For 3 years you tried to break me quietly. Tonight I break you openly." Lorato approached the table with perfect timing, placing the final course before Patricia, a covered silver platter. "Courtesy of the kitchen," she said, lifting the lid. Inside was the very scarf Tabo had given Miriam minutes before, now tied into a knot around a printed copy of the bank transactions and the burner phone messages. Patricia recoiled, pushing her chair back. The audience's murmur swelled like a wave. Tabo shot to his feet, but Cabello stepped forward, blocking his path. "Sit down," Cabello said, his tone low and final. The two brothers locked eyes, years of buried tension crackling between them. Tabo's shoulders stiffened before he slowly sank back into his chair, unable to meet Cabello's gaze. Miriam placed her glass gently on the table, the stem clicking against the wood. "This is where I leave you," she said. "The documents are already filed. The sale is complete. And the next chapter of my life will not include your name." She turned to the crowd, her voice steady. "For anyone wondering, no one deserves to stay where they are unloved and unwanted. Walk away, even if they think they've won." Patricia sat frozen, her hands trembling in her lap. Sifo stared at the legal folder as if it might vanish if he ignored it long enough. Tabo simply stared at Miriam, his lips parting but no words forming. The silence was heavier than any insult they could have thrown at her. Cabello pulled Miriam's chair back, and together they walked toward the exit. Heads turned to follow them, whispers chasing them all the way to the door. Lorato gave Miriam a discreet thumbs up as they passed, a quiet acknowledgement of a plan executed perfectly. Outside, the warm night air wrapped around them. Miriam inhaled deeply, the scent of jasmine from the restaurant garden cutting through the adrenaline still rushing in her veins. Cabello looked at her with a quiet smile. "You did it." She shook her head softly. "We did it." They reached Cabello's car, and before getting in, Miriam glanced back one last time at the glowing windows of Golden Palm. Somewhere inside, Patricia was realizing she had lost her audience. Sifo was counting his losses, and Tabo was confronting the emptiness of his victory. Miriam's smile was small but real, the smile of someone who had reclaimed herself. As they drove away, Miriam rested her hand on her stomach, feeling the quiet promise of the life growing there. She didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but she knew this. She would face it on her own terms, with her head high and her heart free. And for the first time in years she felt no fear. Only the steady, certain beat of her own strength.